The hum of the old fluorescent light filled the workshop, a faint buzz that clung to the silence of the room. Ethan Cole sat hunched over a spread of wires and circuit boards, his callous fingers tracing patterns he had repeated 1,000 times before. He was a man in his late 30s, tall but stooped by years of labor, the kind of labor that didn't just wear down the body but drained the soul. The workshop smelled of solder and oil, a mix of burned copper and machine grease that clung to his clothes. Rows of tools lined the walls with military precision. Everything in its place, everything accounted for. It was the one corner of his world where order remained intact. Description 118 words. Ethan's mind wandered as he tightened the screw on a circuit board. He thought of Marissa, her quiet movements upstairs, the way she avoided his eyes lately. She had grown distant, her laughter dulled, her warmth fleeting. He told himself it was the weight of bills, the grind of life pressing down on them both. Still, an unease gnawed at him, an invisible barrier he couldn't break through. The children were his anchor. Liam, 9, with his restless energy, and Sophie, 6, with her bright questions and endless need for bedtime stories. Their voices kept him tethered to something resembling joy. Ethan often worked late, but the thought of their small footsteps running toward him each evening was enough to carry him through the day. Narration 138 words. The workshop door creaked open. Marissa's silhouette appeared against the hallway light. She leaned on the frame, arms crossed, her features hidden in shadow. "You'll be down here all night?" she asked softly. Ethan didn't look up. "Just finishing a repair. I'll be up soon." A pause stretched between them. He could feel her eyes on him, heavy but unreadable. "Don't stay too long," she murmured before retreating, her steps fading into the house above. The words were ordinary, yet her tone carried something distant, something hollow. Ethan listened until silence reclaimed the house, the workshop once again his refuge and his prison. Dialogue 123 words. He set the screwdriver down, staring at his reflection in the metal tip. His face was older than he remembered, his eyes sunken, his jaw tight. The hum of the light overhead flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move when he wasn't looking. In those shadows, his thoughts grew restless. He wondered when Marissa had stopped holding his hand without being asked, when her smile had turned into a duty rather than a gift. He tried to remember the last time they had laughed together, but the memory refused to come. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Ethan rubbed his temples, exhaustion seeping through his bones. He promised himself he would go upstairs soon, but instead he stayed, soldering in silence. Narration 138 words. Outside, the night pressed against the small workshop window, the glass trembling faintly in the wind. Inside, Ethan clung to mechanical rhythm of his work, unaware of how fragile his constructed world was becoming. The hum of the light, the steady tick of the clock, the tools neatly aligned, all of it whispered control. Yet somewhere above him, in the spaces he could not reach, cracks were widening. The children slept soundly, but the distance between husband and wife stretched deeper with each passing night. And though Ethan didn't know it yet, the shadows in his workshop were only the beginning. The morning after another long night in the workshop, Ethan climbed the stairs with stiff legs and hollow eyes. The house was quiet except for the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. He paused in the hallway, listening. For a moment, the sound seemed foreign, like echoes from a place he no longer belonged. By evening, the family gathered around the dinner table. It was routine, plates set neatly, cutlery aligned, the faint scent of roasted chicken filling the air. But the routine no longer felt warm. Ethan sat at the head, Marissa to his right, Liam and Sophie opposite each other. Their chatter filled the space, but his attention lingered elsewhere. Description 128 words. Marissa served the children first, her eyes fixed on the food rather than the people around her. Ethan noticed the way she avoided looking at him, as though eye contact might spark a fire she didn't want to face. He studied the children as they ate. Liam gestured with his hands, animated and expressive, traits Ethan couldn't trace back to himself. Sophie's smile, sharp and dimpled, seemed borrowed from a face he had never seen in his own family. He felt the observation slide into him like a splinter he couldn't remove. The table was alive with conversation, yet Ethan felt strangely outside of it, a spectator at his own family meal. The laughter sounded rehearsed. Narration, 140 words. "Pass the salt, Dad," Liam said, snapping Ethan from his thoughts. Ethan handed it over, but lingered. "You've been waving your hands around a lot lately. You get that from your mom?" Marissa glanced up, finally meeting his eyes. "He's just being a kid, Ethan. Don't start analyzing everything." "I'm not analyzing," he replied, voice measured. "Just noticing things." Sophie giggled. "Mom says Liam talks too much, like Uncle Daniel used to." The name hung in the air like broken glass. Marissa's hand froze on her fork. Ethan's gaze sharpened. "Uncle Daniel, huh?" he said slowly. Marissa forced a smile. "He's just repeating things. Kids mix up names all the time." Dialogue, 160 words. Ethan's chest tightened. Daniel. The name clawed at the corners of his memory. A neighbor years ago. Someone who had once lingered too long in conversations with Marissa at barbecues. His smile, just a bit too familiar. Ethan remembered brushing it off at the time, but now the thought gnawed at him. He pushed his plate away, no longer hungry. The children kept eating, blissfully unaware, but his eyes stayed fixed on Marissa. She avoided him again, her smile stretched too thin, her movements mechanical. The crack widened. He could feel it. Something beneath the surface of their family, fragile and dangerous, waiting for the right pressure to shatter. Narration, 122 words. The dinner ended in uneasy silence. Marissa cleared the table briskly, her back to him, the clink of dishes masking the tension. Ethan rose, leaning against the doorway, watching her shoulders stiffen under his gaze. "You okay?" he asked. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was heavy. "I'm fine," she answered without turning, voice clipped. He wanted to press, to ask why she kept slipping further away from him, but the children's laughter from the living room silenced him. Instead, he retreated, telling himself tomorrow would be different. Yet as he walked back toward his workshop, the seed of suspicion had already been planted. Tomorrow would bring the whispers of doubt. The next morning bled into routine. Ethan left the house before sunrise, his toolbox rattling in the back of his van. Marissa had been quiet when he kissed her cheek goodbye, her lips cool, her body tense. The children were still asleep, their small breaths muffled behind closed doors. He drove through the quiet streets with a heaviness pressing against his chest. At the workshop of the electrical company, the day unfolded with the usual rhythm, machines humming, wires sparking, the metallic tang of copper filling the air. Ethan found comfort in the technical world, where problems were logical, solvable, free of hidden meanings. But today, even the steady current of work couldn't silence the unease gnawing at him. Description, 118 words. During lunch, Ethan sat with his coworkers, men who joked too loudly and ate too quickly. Liam's name slipped into conversation when Ethan mentioned his son's obsession with tinkering. "You sure he's yours?" One of them, Rick, chuckled. "Kid's got those big brown eyes. Nothing like yours, man." The group laughed lightly, not cruelly, but the words sliced deep. Ethan forced a smile, but the sound of their laughter echoed long after. He excused himself, retreating to the break room's far corner. His chest felt tight, his mind spinning. Rick's joke hadn't meant anything, just banter, but once spoken aloud, it became impossible to dismiss. Dialogue, 122 words. That night, Ethan sat in his workshop again, the tools around him silent witnesses to his unraveling thoughts. He replayed the comment again and again. The children's faces flashed before him. Sophie's sharp smile, Liam's restless hands. None of it matched his own features. He told himself he was overthinking. Every family had quirks. Kids took after grandparents, distant relatives. He tried to bury the thought, but it festered. The more he resisted, the stronger it grew. His hands shook as he opened his laptop. He typed paternity test at home into the search bar, then quickly deleted it, ashamed. Minutes later, he typed it again. Narration, 132 words. Websites promise fast results. Discreet packaging, certainty for the uncertain. Ethan read every line, his pulse hammering. He imagined slipping strands of hair from Sophie's brush, a swab from Liam's toothbrush. The thought made him nauseous. Marissa's voice drifted faintly from upstairs, talking to the children, her tone light and affectionate. Ethan froze, guilt pressing into him. How could he doubt her, the woman who had built this life beside him? And yet the doubt remained. It whispered like static in his mind, relentless, unshakable. He shut the laptop with a snap, swore under his breath, and pressed his palms against his eyes. He told himself it was nothing, but nothing had already begun to consume everything. Narration, 128 words. The workshop felt colder that night, shadows stretching long across the floor. Ethan sat motionless, hearing the faint tick of the clock above him. The hum of the fluorescent light seemed louder than before, each flicker echoing the hesitation inside him. He rose, hands heavy, and walked upstairs to check on the children. They were asleep. Sophie clutching her stuffed bear, Liam sprawled across the bed, innocent, peaceful. Ethan stood in the doorway, torn between love and suspicion. When he turned away, he knew he would order the test. The whisper of doubt had become a voice he could no longer silence. And soon, he would set a secret into motion that could never be undone. The decision weighed on him like lead. After nights of pacing the workshop, Ethan finally admitted what he already knew. He couldn't silence the doubt. It followed him into his sleep. It colored every glance at Marissa, and it gnawed at him whenever the children laughed. He convinced himself it wasn't betrayal, just clarity. Knowing the truth would settle the storm in his chest. Yet even as he thought it, shame crept in. What kind of father sneaks behind his family's back, questioning the very bond that holds them together? Still, the voice inside him whispered, "You need to know." Narration, 128 words. The first attempt came one quiet morning. Marissa had gone to the grocery store, the children playing upstairs. Ethan moved carefully, as though the walls themselves could accuse him. He found Sophie's hairbrush on the bathroom counter, strands of golden brown hair woven into the bristles. His hand trembled as he pulled them free and slipped them into a small plastic bag. Moments later, he crept into Liam's room. A toothbrush rested in a cup by the sink, damp from earlier use. Ethan stared at it, his reflection glaring back at him from a mirror. His jaw clenched as he plucked it out, wrapping it in tissue before hiding it deep in his jacket pocket. Description, 133 words. That evening, he sat in his workshop again, the evidence sealed inside a plain envelope. He had already found a private DNA testing service online. Discreet results guaranteed confidentiality. He addressed the envelope with slow, deliberate strokes. Each letter of his name felt like a confession carved into paper. His chest ached with the weight of secrecy. When Marissa knocked on the workshop door to say dinner was ready, Ethan shoved the envelope under a pile of schematics. "You coming?" she asked, voice muffled. "Yeah," he replied quickly, too quickly. She lingered a second before walking away. Ethan sat frozen, listening to her footsteps fade. The house was still, but inside him, something shifted, darker than before. Dialogue, 135 words. The next day, he mailed it, standing at the post office counter. He felt as though everyone could see through him, as though the clerk's casual smile masked silent judgment. He slid the envelope across the counter, watching it disappear into the system. His hands remained clenched long after he left. Driving home, Ethan's thoughts tangled. He imagined Marissa's face as she discovered what he had done. He pictured the children asking why he no longer smiled. The guilt pressed down hard, but beneath it was a terrible, desperate hope that the results would prove him wrong, that his paranoia was nothing but shadows. But in the same breath, he feared the opposite, that his darkest suspicion was already truth. Narration, 127 words. That night, the workshop no longer offered peace. The tools seemed to stare at him accusingly, silent judges of his betrayal. He rubbed his temples, pacing the floor, whispering to himself that it was necessary. The shadows stretched long, clinging to his every step. Ethan checked the mailbox twice the following morning, even though it was far too soon. The waiting began, and with it came a new kind of torment. Every smile from Marissa felt forced. Every glance at the children twisted the knife deeper. He knew the envelope would return with answers, black and white. What he didn't know was how those answers would break the fragile world he still clung to. The envelope arrived on a gray Thursday afternoon. Ethan almost missed it. Tucked between bills and junk mail, its plain white face revealed nothing of the storm it carried. His hand trembled as he pulled it from the stack, the printed logo of the testing service staring back like an unblinking eye. He slipped it into his jacket before Marissa could notice. She was in the kitchen, humming softly as she chopped vegetables, the children chasing each other through the hallway. For a moment, he considered tearing it open right there, but the thought of being seen, of her eyes catching the truth in his face, was unbearable. So he retreated to his workshop, the envelope clutched like contraband. Description 131 words. Inside, the silence was suffocating. He sat at his workbench, tools scattered around him like forgotten soldiers. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, its flicker matching the stutter of his pulse. He stared at the envelope for what felt like hours. His mind wavered between prayer and dread. Let it prove me wrong. Let this all be paranoia. Let me be the fool. But another voice hissed darker truths. You already know. You've seen it in their faces, in her eyes. This is just the confirmation. At last, he tore the seal. The paper unfolded in his hands, words and numbers blurring until they sharpened into certainty. Liam Cole, not the biological child of Ethan Cole. Sophie Cole, not the biological child of Ethan Cole. Narration, 147 words. The words burned. His breath hitched, shallow and uneven, as if the room had lost all its air. He dropped the papers onto the bench, staring at them as though they might change if he looked long enough. They're mine, he whispered to himself, voice breaking. I raised them. They're mine. But the page didn't care. The ink didn't lie. Ethan gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. A bitter taste filled his mouth, part bile, part grief. Memories of bedtime stories, scraped knees, first steps, all of it replayed in cruel montage, suddenly painted with betrayal. The floor seemed to tilt beneath him. His family, his pride, his very identity had been dismantled in black and white. Dialogue/narration, 146 words. Hours passed, though he couldn't measure them. He sat motionless. The papers lie like a corpse in front of him. Anger bubbled beneath the grief, hot and corrosive. Images of Marissa filled his head, her late-night phone calls, her hollow smiles, the way she had flinched at certain names. All the subtle evasions now rearranged themselves into a single merciless truth. She had lied for years. She had looked him in the eye, shared his bed, and built their life together on a foundation of deceit. He imagined confronting her, slamming the papers onto the table, demanding answers. But fear and rage tangled, paralyzing him. What if she confirmed it without remorse? What if she laughed, as though he should have known all along? Narration, 141 words. Instead, Ethan folded the results back into the envelope and slid it into a locked drawer beneath his workbench. He couldn't let her see, not yet. The thought of her calm denial, of her manipulative explanations, sickened him. Better to wait. Better to bury it inside himself until he was ready. When he emerged from the workshop, his face was calm, his hands steady. Marissa glanced at him from the stove, smiling faintly, unaware that the ground beneath them had shifted forever. The children laughed in the living room, the sound once soothing, now unbearable. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching them, his chest hollow. The rage had not subsided. It had only found a place to grow, silent and patient. And soon, the fragments of lies would begin to surface. Ethan could not look at Marissa the same after the envelope. She moved through the house as if nothing had changed, folding laundry, answering calls, laughing faintly at television shows. But to him, every movement carried a hidden meaning. He lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments he had once dismissed. They returned now like shards of glass, sharp and undeniable. There had been late-night phone calls. Her voice hushed as she slipped into the kitchen, claiming it was about overdue bills. There had been the weekend trips to her sister's place. Always sudden, always with explanations that sounded rehearsed. Ethan had believed her then. Love had blinded him. Now he saw only lies stitched together into years of betrayal. Narration, 129 words. One memory clawed forward with cruel clarity. It was 3 summers ago. Ethan had come home early from work, sweat and dirt clinging to him after a long repair job. He had found Marissa on the porch, phone pressed tight to her ear. "I can't talk now," she whispered, before abruptly hanging up. When she saw him, she smiled too quickly. That was a utility company. "They're threatening to cut service if we don't pay." Ethan hadn't questioned it. He had simply wrapped his arms around her, promising things would get better. Now the memory sickened him. The tenderness he had felt that night curdled into humiliation. Dialogue/flashback, 124 words. The lies spread backward like ink in water. He remembered the way she avoided his touch some evenings, claiming exhaustion. The unexplained receipts he'd once shrugged off, hotel restaurants, gas stations out of town. The time she returned from a quick errand 2 hours late, brushing away his concern with a kiss that tasted forced. He cursed himself for never connecting the threads. He had trusted too easily, loved too blindly. Now, every laugh of hers seemed painted over guilt, every smile a mask. In his mind, the fragments assembled into something whole. Years of deceit, carefully hidden, delivered in whispers and omissions. It wasn't just betrayal of marriage. It was betrayal of identity, of fatherhood itself. Narration, 126 words. He began watching her more closely. At dinner, he studied the way her eyes darted when questions lingered too long. At night, he noted how she turned her phone face down on the nightstand. The children saw only a quiet father, but inside Ethan, obsession bloomed. He wanted to confront her, but the words lodged in his throat. Rage swirled with fear, love warped into something jagged. He told himself he was protecting the children, sparing them the chaos. But the truth was simpler. He wasn't ready to face the answer he already knew. So he collected the fragments one by one, turning them into weapons in his mind. Every memory became evidence. Every silence became proof. Narration, 122 words. By the end of the week, Ethan no longer saw Marissa as his wife, but as a stranger inhabiting her body. He walked past her in the hallway and smelled perfume that wasn't for him. He kissed her cheek and tasted betrayal. At night, while she slept beside him, Ethan lay awake, staring into the dark, consumed by questions. Who was the man? How long had it lasted? How many times had she lied while looking directly into his eyes? He told himself he needed answers. He told himself he needed to know everything. Soon, his obsession would drive him past suspicion, into discovery, and a forbidden man would finally step out of the shadows. The fragments had pointed Ethan toward a shadow, and the shadow soon took a name. Daniel Hayes. It began innocently enough. While digging through an old box in the garage, Ethan found a stack of photographs, barbecues, neighborhood parties, birthdays. In more than a few, Daniel appeared at Marissa's side, smiling too easily, standing too close. Ethan remembered him vaguely as a neighbor who had moved 2 streets over years ago. Back then, Daniel had seemed harmless, friendly even. Now the sight of him was poison. Ethan studied the photos late into the night, tracing Daniel's hand brushing Marissa's arm, her subtle lean toward him. The evidence had always been there. He had simply refused to see it. Narration, 128 words. The obsession tightened its grip. Ethan began driving past Daniel's new house, parking far enough to avoid suspicion, but close enough to watch. The man was in his 40s now, still broad-shouldered, his hair flecked with gray. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that gnawed at Ethan. One evening, Ethan's world tilted further. He returned home early and noticed Marissa in the backyard, phone pressed to her ear. He lingered by the garage door, careful not to be seen. Her voice was low, but fragments carried. "Miss you too, it's complicated. I'll figure something out." Ethan's stomach turned. The voice on the other end was Daniel's. He recognized it instantly, smooth and deliberate, echoing from the memories he'd unearthed. Description/dialogue, 141 words. He pressed himself against the siding, every muscle taut, listening as Marissa paced. "I can't just walk away. The kids. No, he doesn't know." A pause. Her voice softened. Daniel, please. You have to trust me. The name rang like a gunshot in Ethan's ears. His chest pounded, rage boiling beneath his skin. She ended the call abruptly when Sophie's voice called from inside. Ethan slipped back into the workshop before she could notice him. He sat there, trembling, the world narrowing to a single point. The betrayal had a face, a voice, a history. Marissa hadn't just lied. She had built their entire marriage on another man's shadow. And Ethan had been the fool applauding from the sidelines. Narration/dialogue, 133 words. That night, Ethan's reflection in the bathroom mirror was almost unrecognizable. His eyes burned with sleeplessness, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. He gripped the sink, knuckles white, and whispered to himself, "She chose him. She still chooses him." The whisper felt dangerous, like a crack in a dam. He wanted to storm into the bedroom, shove the truth in her face, demand she confess. But another part of him, colder, more calculating, kept him still. Confrontation now would only give her time to twist the narrative, to lie again. So he held his tongue, and the silence festered, transforming grief into obsession, obsession into rage. The man behind the lies was no longer forbidden. He was real, tangible, and within reach. Narration, 124 words. Days blurred into nights. Ethan watching, listening, piecing together scraps of their hidden conversations. The house had become a stage, every gesture suspect, every silence waited. Marissa still smiled, still kissed him goodnight, but her eyes flickered elsewhere. And Ethan, sitting in the dark of his workshop, clutched the truth like a blade. He could no longer see his wife without seeing Daniel's shadow draped across her. The pressure built inside him, steady and merciless. The confrontation he once avoided was no longer a question of if, only when. Soon, the storm would break behind closed doors. And when it did, nothing in the Cole household would remain intact. The house was silent when Ethan decided he could no longer hold the storm inside. The children had gone to bed hours earlier, their soft breaths echoing faintly through the hallway. Marissa was in the bedroom, brushing her hair in front of the mirror, the lamplight casting her reflection in warm tones. To anyone else, it might have looked peaceful. To Ethan, it looked staged, rehearsed, like every smile she had given him for years. He stood in the doorway for a long time, his shadow stretching across the floor. She glanced up, catching his eyes in the mirror, and froze for a heartbeat before forcing a smile. "You're up late again," she said lightly. Narration/description, 139 words. Ethan stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. The click of the latch was louder than he intended. "We need to talk," he said. Marissa turned, her brush still in her hand. "About what?" His voice trembled, but it carried a sharp edge. "Don't play with me, Marissa. I know about Daniel." Her face drained of color. The brush slipped from her fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. "I heard you," Ethan snapped. "The phone calls, the secrets. And the kids." His throat tightened, the words scraping out. "They're not mine." For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Marissa's eyes filled with tears, but her lips pressed together, as if she couldn't decide whether to lie again or finally speak the truth. Dialogue, 163 words. When she finally answered, her voice was barely audible. "It's true." The admission knocked the air from Ethan's lungs. He staggered back, gripping the dresser to steady himself. "How long?" His voice cracked. "Years," she confessed, tears sliding down her cheeks. "It started before Sophie was born. I didn't mean for it to happen, Ethan. Daniel was different. He listened. He made me feel." "Don't." Ethan cut her off, his voice breaking into a growl. "Don't you dare romanticize this." "I stayed because of you," she said quickly, desperation flooding her tone. "Because you're stable. You provide. You're good with them. Daniel could never give them the life you can. I chose this family, Ethan. I chose you." Her words sliced through him like knives, each one twisting deeper than the last. Narration/dialogue, 153 words. He laughed then, a hollow, bitter sound. You chose me? You chose to lie. To make me raise another man's children. To look me in the eye every damn day while you whispered promises to him. Marissa shook her head violently. No, it wasn't like that. I love you, Ethan. In my own way, I do, but I love them more. I wanted them to have a father who would stay. Her plea rang false, or maybe it was simply too late for truth to matter. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, rage and grief colliding until he could no longer tell one from the other. You used me, he said coldly. You used me to cover your shame. Her sobs filled the room, but his fury drowned them out. Narration, 144 words. The walls seemed to close in around them. The air thickened, every breath sharp with anger. Ethan paced the room, running his hands through his hair, unable to stand still. Marissa sat on the edge of the bed, shaking, her tears dripping into her lap. Please, she whispered, don't tell them. They don't need to know. They love you. You're their father in every way that matters. But her plea only fueled his fury. Not mine, not mine. The phrase echoed, relentless. He stared at her, his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. For the first time, the thought of violence flickered through his mind. Not a choice, not yet, but a shadow of what was to come. And though he said nothing more, the silence between them roared louder than any argument. Narration/description, 151 words. That night, Ethan lay awake beside her, his body rigid, hers curled into fragile sleep. He stared at the ceiling, the cracks in the plaster forming shapes that seemed to mock him. The truth had been spoken, but there was no relief in it. Only devastation, only rage. His wife's confession had not ended the torment. It had ignited something darker. He turned his head to look at her, watching the rise and fall of her chest. She looked peaceful, but he knew peace was a mask she wore too well. The storm behind closed doors had only begun, and soon it would break into something that could never be undone. The storm that had raged in Ethan's chest for days finally split open. Sleep had become a stranger, leaving him pacing the workshop until dawn. Tools scattered like shards of his unraveling mind. He could still hear Marissa's voice, her admission, her pleas, her claim that she had chosen him. The words echoed like a taunt, circling back until they twisted into a single, poisonous truth. She had destroyed everything. That night, the house lay heavy in silence. The children were tucked in, their soft laughter replaced by the hush of sleep. Marissa moved quietly in the kitchen, rinsing dishes beneath the glow of the overhead light. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching, his fists clenched, his breathing uneven. Something inside him had already snapped. Narration/description, 157 words. She turned when she noticed him, drying her hands on a towel. Ethan, she said softly, as though sensing the weight in his gaze. We can work through this. For the kids. Her voice only made the pressure in his chest tighten. For the kids. Children that weren't his. Children that bore another man's features while calling him Dad. He stepped into the kitchen, his eyes catching the hammer on the counter, left there from earlier repairs. His fingers twitched. Work through this, he muttered, his tone hollow. Marissa set the towel aside, moving closer, her hands raised as if to calm him. Please, don't look at me like that. I stayed because I loved you in the only way I knew how. Daniel. The name was a spark in a powder keg. Ethan's vision blurred red. Dialogue/narration, 162 words. His hand shot forward, seizing the hammer. Before thought could intervene, before reason could crawl back, he swung. The sound was sickening, a dull, heavy crack that silenced a mid-sentence. Marissa crumpled against the counter, her eyes wide with shock, blood trickling down her temple. Her lips parted, forming a trembling whisper. Ethan, but the storm was unstoppable now. Years of betrayal, humiliation, and rage funneled into every strike. He brought the hammer down again and again, the tiles beneath him catching the spray of crimson, each blow louder than the last. His breaths came ragged, animalistic. The kitchen echoed with a brutal rhythm until her movement ceased. Her body sprawled lifeless on the blood-smeared floor. Then silence. The silence was deafening. Narration/description, 151 words. Ethan staggered back, the hammer slipping from his blood-soaked hand and clattering against the tiles. His chest heaved, sweat mixing with the spatter on his skin. He stared down at her, at the woman who had once been his world, now reduced to stillness. The light above flickered, humming softly, as though mocking the carnage below it. He wiped his face with trembling hands, but the red only smeared deeper into his skin. Somewhere in the distance, he heard a sound, soft at first, then clearer, a muffled sob. His head jerked toward the hallway. The children, they had heard. Narration/description, 128 words. Tiny feet shuffled on the wooden floorboards beyond the doorway. Sophie's voice broke through, fragile and trembling. "Mommy?" Ethan froze, his breath caught in his throat. He turned, and in the sliver of hallway light, he saw their shadows. Two small figures pressed together, clinging to each other. Their muffled cries filled the silence Marissa had left behind. "Go back to bed," he said hoarsely, his voice unrecognizable even to himself. But his command only frightened them more. A whimper echoed, followed by the creak of retreating steps. Their door clicked shut, but the sobbing continued, faint and muffled, bleeding through the walls like a haunting refrain. Ethan pressed both hands to his head, pacing in the kitchen, the bloodied tiles anchoring him to the nightmare he had created. Dialogue/narration, 154 words. Time blurred. Seconds stretched into hours, though the clock above the stove ticked steadily on. Ethan knelt beside Marissa's body, his breast shallow, his hands hovering as though he could undo what had been done. But there was no undoing, only the chilling reality of crimson stains and stillness. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like a tomb. The children's sobs had quieted into hiccuping silence, but their presence weighed heavy, like ghosts pressing in from a hallway. Ethan stared at the hammer, at his hands, at the shattered illusion of family, and in that moment, he realized the storm had not ended. It had only shifted. Tomorrow would bring questions. The outside world would come knocking, and blood could never stay hidden. The kitchen reeked of iron. The tiles beneath Ethan glistened under the harsh overhead light, streaked with crimson no amount of scrubbing could erase completely. He crouched low, rag in hand, his knuckles raw from hours of frantic wiping. Each stroke smeared the blood rather than removed it, leaving ghostly stains that taunted him. He whispered under his breath as he worked, half prayer, half curse. "It had to be done, she left me no choice." The words quivered in the air, desperate, hollow. But even as he muttered, the image of Marissa's lifeless eyes haunted him. Every time he blinked, he saw her mouth forming that final whisper, "Ethan?" Narration/description, 142 words. The silence was unbearable. Too heavy, too loud. He rose, staggering toward the sink, rinsing the rag in scalding water until his hands burned. The red swirled down the drain like smoke, only to return each time he looked back at the floor. It was endless. His thoughts churned with feverish speed. She betrayed me. She made me raise his children. She laughed behind my back. The justifications stacked themselves like bricks, building a fragile wall against the crumbling truth of what he had done. It wasn't murder, he told himself aloud, gripping the counter so hard the wood creaked. It was justice. His reflection in the dark window sneered back, smeared in red. A stranger stared at him from the glass, eyes hollow, jaw clenched tight. Narration/dialogue, 159 words. From the hallway came a creak, followed by a faint sniffle. The children, they hadn't slept, he knew it. Their silence was not peace, but fear. Ethan pressed a fist to his temple, fighting the urge to march down the hallway and explain, confess, that everything had been a lie, that he had been the victim all along. But what words could a child understand? How could he tell them their mother was gone because she had chosen another man? Instead, he shut their door quietly, sealing them their world of nightmares, then returned to his grisly work. Narration/description, 112 words. Hours passed. The kitchen looked cleaner, but never clean enough. A faint copper tint clung to the grout between the tiles, an echo of the violence that had soaked into the house itself. Ethan dumped the rags into a black trash bag, tying it tight, his fingers trembling. As he hauled the bag outside, The night air struck him cold. The quiet street stretched endlessly, every shadow carrying accusation. Somewhere far away, a dog barked, then stopped abruptly. Then he heard it. Sirens. Distant at first, then swelling. The wail tore through the night air like judgment itself. Ethan froze in the driveway, the bag dangling from his hand, sweat beating at his temple. Narration/description, 118 words. Panic clawed at him. Were they coming here? Had someone heard the hammer strikes, the screams? Had Sophie or Caleb whispered through the walls to a neighbor on the phone? He stumbled back inside, locking the door with shaking hands. His chest rose and fell in frantic waves. He told himself the sirens would pass, that they weren't meant for him. But doubt lingered. Paranoia crept into every corner. The walls seemed closer, the house tighter. Every creak in which sounded like footsteps. Every passing car like an accusation. He sank to the blood-stained floor, burying his face in his hands. The silence had returned, but it was no longer empty. It was a countdown. The sirens that once passed in the night returned days later, this time stopping at Ethan's door. Red and blue light spilled across the walls of the house, painting over the shadows he had tried so hard to scrub away. The children's frightened whispers rose from their room as fists pounded against the door. "Mr. Cole, open up." Ethan's heart thundered, but his legs carried him forward anyway. The kitchen, the floor, the hammer. He had convinced himself he'd cleaned enough, but lies could never mask blood. He twisted the lock, and the door swung open to reveal two officers, their expressions hard, their eyes sweeping past him into the home he no longer recognized. Narration/description, 144 words. At the station, the sterile walls closed and tighter than his own house had. Ethan sat hunched at a metal table, his reflection warped in its surface. Across from him, Detective Harlow leaned forward, his voice calm but piercing. "Neighbors heard shouting that night. Some saw you taking out trash bags. We found traces of blood in the grout. You want to tell me what happened, Ethan?" Ethan swallowed hard. His mouth was dry, his throat aching. "It was an accident," he muttered. Harlow's brow furrowed. "An accident doesn't leave hammer-shaped fractures." The words sliced clean to the thin veil Ethan had wrapped around himself. His chest tightened. His hands shook. He lowered his eyes, staring at the stains on his knuckles that soap had failed to erase. Dialogue/narration, 157 words. Hours blurred into interrogations, questions echoing until they lost meaning. Forensic photographs, neighbors' testimonies, timelines, all threads weaving a noose around him. The children were taken into protective custody, their small faces pale with confusion. Ethan caught one final glimpse of Sophie clutching Caleb's hand, their wide eyes searching for answers he could never give. It broke something inside him, not with anger, but with the crushing weight of loss. They had been his joy, even if they weren't his by blood. Now they were gone too, slipped through his hands like everything else. The rage that had once driven him burned out, leaving only ash. He signed the confession. The pen scraped across the paper, like a final judgment, binding him to the truth he could no longer deny. Narration/description, 148 words. Prison swallowed him whole. The clang of bars, the heavy boots of guards, the cold mattress, all reminders that freedom was a memory. The days blended together, a monotony broken only by his own thoughts gnawing at him in the dark. He replayed Marissa's words over and over. "I stayed because of you." Sometimes they sounded like betrayal. Other times, they sounded like pity. He could not decide which hurt more. Ethan thought of Daniel, too. Somewhere outside, free, the true father the children Ethan had raised. Hatred twisted in his gut, but even that hatred felt hollow now, drained of fire. In the end, the cell walls did not punish him as much as the silence did. The silence carried her voice, their laughter, and the echo of hammer strikes that could never be undone. Narration, 133 words. On the fourth night, Ethan sat at the small desk in his cell, staring at a scrap of paper. He wrote slowly, the words jagged but deliberate. "I was a father, even if not by blood. I loved them. That love was real. But truth demands a price, and I have paid it." He set the pencil down, folded the paper, and slipped it into the Bible left by the chaplain. Outside, footsteps echoed, then faded. The prison fell quiet. Ethan lay back on his cot, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Betrayal had driven him here. But it was not betrayal that would keep him. It was truth. Truth, with its unrelenting cost, had chained him tighter than any bar ever could. And in the dark, Ethan Cole finally understood what it meant to be buried alive.